is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft beer and craft chocolate. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional beer writer and an advanced cicerone, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or at her website, annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. In this episode, we talk with Nicole Hewat, founder of World Tree Chocolate. World Tree offers curated chocolate boxes based on flavor preferences, but Nicole is also an artist, and she's used cacao in various forms for watercolor paintings, as well as illustrations for a book about the cacao-growing and chocolate-making process. During our conversation, we talked about flavor and the tasting experience, her process for creating her paintings, and the way flavor can interact with our emotions and the art we take in during the tasting process. The driving theme of Bean to Barstool is the interaction of flavor with our memories, emotions, and imaginations. When I first saw Nicole Hewat's paintings at World Tree Chocolate using chocolate byproducts as paint, I was intrigued by this extension of that idea. Here were the very ingredients that create the flavors of chocolate being used in another sensory medium, conveying color and shape and place. It was no surprise when Nicole and I spoke recently that she sees so much overlap and influence between our senses, with everything from music to weather to visual art influencing her flavor perception. Listen in as we discuss these interactions and take a deep dive into her artistic process. At the outset, I asked her what World Tree Chocolate is all about.
One of the focus with World Tree is to create collections of craft chocolate bars for people based on their flavor preferences and other things like where they've traveled to in the world. So somebody might want to do a gift collection and the person lived in Peru for a while. So I'll gather a bunch of bars that have cacao coming from Peru and create a collection for them based on that. But mostly it's to do with flavor. And on my website, I have a whole list of different flavors that people can click on, because I found over doing markets and events that people attach flavors a lot to what they want to look for, because it seems to be a bit overwhelming when they have this like huge collection of chocolate bars and they don't really know where to start with it. I just say, okay, well, what are some of your favorite flavors? That's like the craft chocolate bar portion. And then I am trained as an artist, as a painter. So I was also curious about how to use cocoa husks. Powder later came into play, but the cocoa husks were something that was a bit of a byproduct of the chocolate making process. And I thought, okay, well, I know how to make ink with different materials, so let's experiment with the husks. And I was able to get some from Contu, like some different chocolate makers, and it worked really, really well. I ended up also making paint and creating some paintings with those materials. And then later decided, because I have been oil painting since I was about 12, and so I'm really used to working with that type of material, I figured cocoa butter would be in the same line as linseed oil. So that's where that kind of progressed. So now I have a collection of art-based products and then share it with people and they can order it.
Well, that's nice. Yeah, so I see on your site that you do flavor adventures. That's kind of what you're talking about with what people are looking for from flavors. You put together a different adventure for them.
Yeah, I ended up putting the focus on flavor because that's kind of what naturally came about when I was talking to people. So a lot of it comes down to expectations. What I learned was that people have a pretty solid expectation of what chocolate is supposed to taste like. And sometimes I would let them try some chocolate and they wouldn't be very happy about it because it didn't taste like chocolate, like what they wanted it to taste like in their memories. So I was putting the focus less on this is chocolate and more on what are the flavors that you're experiencing? What are the flavors that you're looking for? That also progressed into doing a lot of pairings. I focused on this more on Instagram, but kind of allowing people to expand the whole experience so that it's not just I'm eating chocolate. I'm experiencing these flavors and these other flavors and or art, color, all different kinds of things, so that the sensory input would just be focused on breaking it down to its more simple pieces. So there isn't quite such a strong association with what their expectations are with what chocolate's supposed to taste like.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, the way our senses interact like that. And we'll talk about that more in just a little bit. Let's back up and talk about your own journey of getting into craft chocolate.
Ooh, about 7 years ago or 8 years ago, I was living in Victoria, BC, and I was a bicycle tour guide, which was a really fun job. And we had a culinary tour that took us through the Victoria Public Market. And that's where I found the chocolate project. And they had samples. So, of course, I would always take my guests there because it was very exciting to let them try craft chocolate after I discovered this is what chocolate can taste like. I was kind of amazed because I've always loved chocolate. But then when I tasted something that was, for me, when I tasted something that was very different than what I expected, I got very excited because it was like, wow, this is delicious. And it's more than I could have ever expected to come from this product. So that's where I first tasted it. And then I ended up obviously becoming a pretty solid customer, and learning more and more from them, and then taking some classes. And then it just became the situation where there was so much to learn about chocolate, so much more than I could have realized, that it just kept going and going and going. And I ended up back in Ontario and decided that I wanted to share more about craft chocolate with more people.
Were there makers that were important to you early in that journey? You mentioned the chocolate project. Were there others?
Well, through the chocolate project, I think one of my favorite makers initially was Askinosie. And then as I started to learn more about working with makers more directly, we ended up going to Montreal and meeting Alfie and Maxime at Contu and going in and like seeing their chocolate making process, which was fantastic.
I love talking to them. They're so enthusiastic.
Oh, it was wonderful. It was the best like initial introduction to that process I could have ever had. So they've been people who I've been very consistently working with and really love working with them. And then I also developed a relationship with Iris and Bob at Solkiki. I haven't met them yet, but I hope to get over there to meet them someday. And we've had lots of really great conversations. And I carry their chocolate bars as well. And I think I'm the only retailer in Canada at this point, but they have an amazing variety of flavor inclusions, and it's just really, really fun to discover all different new ways of exploring chocolate with these chocolate makers. And Soma in Toronto, I'd known about them, and I got to meet them at the Winter Chocolate Show just like in 2020. And that was really wonderful as well. There's a lot. I have met and really loved so many different chocolate bars and chocolate makers. And one that surprised me fairly recently in this last order was a caipirinha bar by Bayani and
Yes,
Brazil.
I love that bar.
I love that bar.
It's so good.
And I had a personal connection to the drink because I lived in Amsterdam and I worked at a restaurant, and they served that drink, and I'd never had anything like that before, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I saw, oh wow, there's a chocolate bar. So I got really excited and I tried it, and it was fantastic. So that's one recently that I've gotten excited about.
I used that one in a pairing a couple months back, a guided pairing I was leading, and everybody loved that one.
I bet.
Let's talk about the tasting experience. What is it like for you to sit down and taste chocolate now? Do you have a particular process?
So generally, I want it to be quiet and I want to be able to focus. I think that's what a lot of people, when they really want to like pay attention to what's going to happen, I want to make sure my palate is cleansed so that I don't have any other flavors in my mouth, and then just take the time to have some of the chocolate and kind of think about what I'm experiencing. What is it making me think of? It is really subjective. So I've had a lot of people try the chocolate and different kinds of bars, and it's just such a range of experiences. And for myself, like there's a few bars that are pretty consistent. I'm like, yes, I know what to expect with this one. The Chihuahua bar by Solkiki, there's been a few times I've tasted very different things when I try it. And it'll be depending on, well, there's all different factors, right? That's going on in your body and your mind, all different kinds of moments. So honestly, like in my experience, I could be sitting in the same place and have the same parameters of how I'm going to try the chocolate, but I could have a different tasting experience based on hormones and chemical makeup of whatever's happening in my body at the time, or all different kinds of factors that I don't have a lot of control over. So I think it's interesting to try to have like a specific set of ways in order to try the chocolate, but really like it's going to be something where like personally, I really love dipping it into like a hot tea and then just enjoying it with like a hot tea. And that's just a really lovely experience. And so that's my favorite way to just enjoy it. But if I'm trying to decide, oh, should I carry this bar, or, you know, I really want to figure this chocolate out, I want to dissect some of the flavors, then yeah, I try to follow as many parameters as I can to make that a clean experience.
Beyond just a bar tasting good, we've all had that experience of trying a bar and just having some sort of deeper connection to it, whether it's a memory, an emotion that we associate with it. Do you feel like you've had those experiences, or maybe what are some of the bars that have done that where you feel like this has tapped into something deeper for you?
I would say, yeah, I've definitely experienced that. And it sometimes, like I said, the same bar, it can trigger that experience, but then the next time I try it, it doesn't. So it also depends on what have I seen or done right before eating the chocolate. There's so many different factors, but I would say the caipirinha bar is one that really shot me right back to Amsterdam. That was pretty cool. And then sometimes the hidden treasure bar, the first time I had that bar from Cantu, because it's so different and it has such a like a roasty kind of like warming, cozy experience to it. It felt like kind of home, like it had like a really lovely engulfing experience. And so there are bars that I've had that happen with, but it doesn't always happen. I can have memories or think of different kinds of things, but I also find where I'm looking at certain images or different kind, like if I'm looking out the window, it will have an influence on how I'm tasting the chocolate or what I'm thinking of or what it's triggering. So there's always a lot that's incorporated in the experience, which is why I really like, you can create so much variety with one chocolate bar, just depending on where you're located, what you're looking at, what you're listening to, what other things you're tasting. It's just this like wealth of variety of experience, and you can just access so much with so little. So that's what's really exciting about it.
That's really interesting. We do tend to think of flavors being a fixed thing, but we are changing instruments. And so it's almost like we're pairing the chocolate with whatever state we're in at any time that we're tasting it.
That's right.
So you have also written a book that's on your website called Cacao to Chocolate. Tell us a little bit about the creation of that.
Yeah, so that came about because I was no longer able to do in-person events. And it wasn't really very easy for me to go to online events. So I decided to take some time to really focus in on making some kind of creation with the time that I had. And because I worked a lot with oil paint, it was like, and I knew the mechanics of how oil paint worked, and I've made paint before, I figured, okay, well, I wonder how cacao butter can work with pigment. The other thing that I've had experience with is called paint on glass animation. So I spent some years experimenting with, and I did use oil paint on glass, and then I would take a bunch of photos and create an animation. And it was a great process. I really enjoyed it, but it involved a lot of animation technology that I ended up not having access to. And so it made it really difficult to pursue that more. But I figured, because cocoa butter doesn't dry the same like a linseed oil, it's not a drying oil. So you can't create a painting like I could with the how I made watercolor paint out of cocoa powder. I couldn't create a painting that would just be able to last a long time, but I could mix it with pigment and then paint on glass and take a photo of that. And then I thought, okay, well, what would I do with these photos? And I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to use the material and then tell the story of where chocolate comes from? How is it made? Because that is something that I had to repeat a lot during events and markets. I had a dried cacao pod. I had to try to explain this to people. I was like, wow, there are a lot of people that have no idea. They don't have a clue about chocolate. So I thought, what do I want to make something very simple and accessible, something that's really pretty and delightful and that people want to engage with. And painting with the cocoa butter really made sense for that. The process is a little bit tricky because the fluidity, it also dries quite quickly once it cools down to, like room temperature cocoa butter is pretty solid. So I had to get a metal palette that fit over top of a pottery bowl that I had, put hot water in the bowl, and then put the pigments in the palette and then put pieces of cocoa butter, and then they would melt. And then I could mix the colors and work with it, but it all had to be on this metal palette or it would dry very, very fast. So then I would take those colors, and as soon as I applied them to the glass, they would dry quite quickly. So it was a bit of a rush process, but once I got the hang of it, it was kind of like painting outside or painting in spaces where there's a bit of a rush, a bit of a urgency about the process. And so it just took some time to get the hang of it and figure out exactly what I wanted to create, because you have to create it like it could get kind of muddy or it could get kind of looking too rough if you applied the cocoa butter in a certain way. So I had to learn how to apply it in a way that it had a bit of a smoother, a bit of a nice texture. So it was quite a learning experience.
It sounds like you'd have to really have some sureness to doing what you wanted to do before you did it, because you don't really have much room to correct there.
No, you could scrape it off. That was the only thing. Like when I finished the painting and I took the photos, then I would scrape it off and I would do another one. I made sure to use materials that weren't fit for consumption, but they were still natural, like spirulina, turmeric, cocoa powder, cayenne pepper, different kinds of materials and powders, but I would get like expired ones or ones that you couldn't eat anymore. So it was a nice way to try to use products after their shelf life.
Sure.
In an attempt to reduce waste, but it's very minimal, like very small amounts were used to create the paintings.
Sure. And so that's how you created all of the artwork for the book?
Yes.
That's amazing. You also on your website have paintings you've done with cacao, and I'm very interested in the process that went into that. Was that a similar process or you did something different for those?
Those were quite different. I didn't use any cocoa butter. So those have a very long, like they're hanging, I have one of them hanging up on the wall and it's lasted years without the color shifting, without any degradation to the paper. It's done very, very well. Coffee has been used for quite a long time to make ink. It's a really beautiful ink. And I ended up using the cocoa husks as well. The coffee was really good for like those deep, really dark blacks. Cocoa husks were really interesting to work with because depending on the variety of cacao, the location, there's like different factors for different types of husks. What I would do is I would take a coffee grinder and I ground the husks down. To make ink, I would just boil the husks in water and then reduce it and then use that for the painting. And that was ink. When I decided to move more into to making the paint, I would grind the husks down and then I would mix them with gum arabic, honey, and water with a muller. So it's a glass muller and you would use it on glass to actually use it on marble to mix the paint up. And then you would use that paint on paper. So the husks were really fun because they already had a bit of a range of colors. The Hidden Treasure husks had a really yellow, very light kind of color. And then some of the other husks had more towards pink. And I also found that if I took some of that paint and I put in like a little bit of acid, so it'd be like lemon juice or vinegar, it would move more towards yellow even more. And then if I put a little bit of baking soda with the paint, it would move more towards pink. So I could shift and play.
The pH really affects the color.
Yeah, you could get like a pretty cool range of tone the more you played with these different pH values. And I would assume that the husks themselves had different pH values, which influenced the different kinds of colors. Also, the amount of roasting time would have affected the color. I also roasted some of them in a cast iron pan to really burn them down. And then I used that to make another layer of a darker color. So I could get a nice range and then create these landscape paintings. And I decided to do landscapes based on where the cacao is grown because I really like the connection between the materials and the place where they're coming from.
Sure.
That's just what inspired the subject matter. And I thought it was interesting to put a focus on those places, because they're also places where people, they think about chocolate. And in my experience, when I'm talking to people at markets or, oh, I know chocolate, I've had Belgian chocolate. And I go, okay, well, yeah, let's try this one here.
Yeah,
Let's talk
right.
about it.
Absolutely. So for each of those paintings, then the location that you're painting, you're using cacao husks from that same origin.
Generally, yeah.
Okay. Describe to us a little bit some of these paintings. So you've got several different origins there on the website. Tell me a little bit about what we're seeing in those scenes.
One was from Honduras, and the image, I think I got it from, yes, I got it from someone who goes to that location to pick up the cocoa beans and bring them back to makers. And they took pictures while they were on one of their trips. And they let me use one of their pictures to create the painting. Another one was actually from a picture that Alfie and Maxime had taken on one of their trips to Peru. And then another one was from a photo that was on a cacao farm in Ecuador. So I tried to make sure it wasn't just general, this picture, so Google search of Peru. I was trying to like get the image that I was using to be really connected to the chocolate makers or the people who are sourcing or growing, and then use these images to create a painting with the, so there's a lot of connection. I like creating as much connection as possible.
And how long does one of these paintings typically take you?
It depends on the size, and it depends on kind of where I'm at with the painting process at that time. Some of them can go pretty quick, and some of them I have to go back into them a few times, so they'll like evolve over some days. Now, when I did create these paintings, I had a 2-year-old at home, so there was a lot of, I have 15 minutes to try to do some painting right now, or I have a half an hour right now. So it can be a bit tricky. At this point now, she's in school, I probably would be able to get one done in a morning, for example.
And you're doing these on canvas, I assume?
No, it's a type of cotton watercolor paper that is very thick. It's a heavy duty watercolor paper that I've had for a long time, but it's really, really beautiful paper.
Have you had the opportunity to travel to any of these origins?
I lived in Belize for a while, but that was before I knew much about chocolate. So unfortunately, I couldn't actually get to experience anything. I've never been to a cacao farm, but it is definitely something that is going to happen at some time. But what I did do in Belize was I saw and learned about like the Mayan culture, which was really interesting, and food. Learned about different fruits and different foods. Like fruits I could never even have imagined that they existed. And so even just exploring what wealth there is in flavor and variety of food is just something that I've also been really fascinated about, which is what plays into some of the pairings too. And then learning about that variety in places like Belize, coming back, living in Canada, and then making friends with farmers and learning about how a carrot isn't just a carrot. You can have multiple colors of a carrot. You can have different flavors. After the first frost, it gets sweeter. So there's just like so much more about food that I think people, they just don't have a clue about, which is really exciting that when you learn about it, it's like, wow, there's so much to learn.
I imagine as people have seen you doing some of these paintings, they might want one of their own. I mean, have you done any commissions or have people saying, hey, I have a photo, can you recreate this?
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Final Gravity Issue 5 is now available in the shop on beantobarstool.com. This 5th issue of our zine telling personal, human-centered stories from the world of beer is full of great articles. Bano Segudu tells the story of the South African beer style Umkombothi, poignantly explaining its role in her culture and the importance in her family's celebrations and milestones. Maria Krugliak writes about discovering the Portuguese half pint after moving to Portugal during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amanda Bruns and Obakeng Malope discuss the water spirit Mamuhaswa and the collaboration beer they brewed in her honor. These and numerous other stories fill the 56 pages of this zine. We've expanded it and added a few features for this issue. It's full color, full of lots of beautiful photography and art. Definitely check this out. It's on beantobarstool.com/shop. You can purchase this issue or subscribe, and you can always support us on Patreon and get extra perks as well. Cheers.
I did. I actually created one of the photos in cocoa butter paint, and I sent them the image as just a print. So far with I think, and this is something I had kind of anticipated, but with the cocoa husk paint and ink, it's a little bit more intimidating because with a natural product, I'm not sure people realize how much longevity it can have. And so, no, I haven't had people really get excited about wanting to purchase those, which is okay. I was also not entirely sure about the longevity, but because it's a dried product and it's on this really good acid-free, like very high quality paper, it's been doing very, very well. But I am open to commissions. And one of the interesting commissions I had was for a phenology wheel that's basically like takes you through the process of the chocolate making process, but in a circle. So that one I did with traditional watercolor paint, and it was more of a fun project. But yeah, I am open to commissions at this point. I'm kind of focused a little bit more right now on the art side of my practice. Color. I'm really diving into a lot of stuff around color. So I'm still working with a lot of different paints. I haven't been working with the cocoa husk ink and paint or the cocoa butter as much recently, but it's always something that can be opened up again.
I'm very interested. You talked about this earlier, the way that flavor can interact with our other senses. I'm curious about how you as a visual artist interact with flavor. Do you find when you're tasting chocolate or anything else that you are inspired to create visual art? Do you feel like there are images or anything like that that are coming to you as you're tasting?
Not as often as I would like. I think it would be fun to have a lot more happening when I'm tasting the chocolate. A lot of the time it's like, oh, I like that. It just has this like, I associate it more with a feeling than any specific visuals. But I have had really a lot of fun with playing with incorporating visuals, videos, paintings, or even sound while I'm tasting to try to direct my experience and see how it opens up different ideas or feelings while I'm having that bigger experience. But when I'm just tasting the chocolate, sometimes I can be inspired to make like a painting, but I'm very like I'm someone who thinks a lot, and there's just a lot going on all the time, and it can be very busy. It can feel very busy. So one of the things that I do love about chocolate is it sort of quiets that down a little bit and allows me to have a bit of a break from the noise.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I find that flavor can be very anchoring. If there is a lot of that going on, if I can make myself focus on my senses in that way, it can be quieting in that way. I'm interested in what you said about trying to direct your own flavor responses with outside stimuli, whether that's music or visuals. Tell me a little bit more about that.
One example, I noticed that I had some wine and chocolate pairings and some beer and chocolate pairings, and I would incorporate, say, Conti's Grand Blanco bar, which has a lot of really beautiful citrus notes, and it's very bright. And it goes back to me saying I it's a theory, but I believe that some of the people thought I'm tasting chocolate, and then they got this flavor and it wasn't what they expected, and so they were a bit put off and they weren't very happy about it. So I started to experiment with what if I paired that bar with a type of fruit or a type of drink that would really heighten that experience of what the flavor of the chocolate has to offer, or like, in a simple term, you could say like a picture of a tropical place or something, or the color yellow, or like something that would allow the person's mind to attach to something that wasn't just the idea of chocolate. And then it would like help open things up a bit, because I do find that there's a bit of, myself included, I can get stuck in expectations. And so incorporating other things like even music. So sound can work as well. But anything else, it just kind of allows your mind to just open and be a little bit more curious and accepting of different types of experiences.
That's very interesting. I find that the music I'm listening to and the weather outside more than anything else will impact how I react to different flavors.
Yeah, weather's a big one. I didn't actually articulate or like put that thought like into writing, but you're right. It definitely depends on what's happening outside, temperature.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's winter right now here where I am, and yeah, I definitely experience some chocolate bars different at this time of year than I would say in the middle of the summer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not predictable. I'll find sometimes like in the winter, some bars I will get very sunny, warm, tropical notes from, and I think it's because maybe it's a form of escapism. I'm leaning toward that. Other times I will get very comforting, indulgent flavors, and I think it's because I'm leaning more into the coziness of the season. And I don't know how much of those are organic to what's in the bar and how much of that is my headspace at any given moment. I guess we don't have a way to know.
I think a lot of it actually is influenced by where you are mentally, or what could trigger a memory might have something to do as well with what did I just see on some video or what did I just listen to. And then you have this chocolate and it then carries that further. And that can be the same with lots of different food products or drinks or anything where you can have it just trigger a whole other experience in your mind. Yeah, I don't think it's special to chocolate, but I do think what's really exciting about craft chocolate is just there's so much variety, which is partly why I'm trying to like encourage people to kind of move past that childhood expectation and what they're used to. It's a very different experience for people with chocolate, say, compared to coffee or even craft beer, because craft beer is for adults. Right. So they haven't really experienced it until they're an adult. And so there's a lot shorter like path for them to get to, oh, different flavors in craft beer. I understand this. This is okay. But childhood chocolate, no, this has to taste like what it did like when I was a child, or something is wrong and my childhood was a lie, or there's some kind of weird like mental thing that happens. And so because I've watched a lot of people go through this mental process and talk to them about it when I'm out doing markets, and I'm just like, oh, okay, this is deeper than just like, here, try this product. I know it's expensive, but it's totally worth it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. What story are you telling with your paintings?
I would say mostly it has to do with expressing those connections I was talking about around materials and place, and then also just like versatility and variety. Like I'm kind of a process-based artist. So as far as like story, I get really fascinated by just the process of making the paint, taking these materials and moving through these different ways of turning them to something else, and then creating a painting that links those materials back to like where they came from. So I guess the journey, how did these materials come to me? Where did they come from? I guess that's what gets me really excited about it. A lot of connection.
After Nicole and I stopped recording, we spent a few minutes venting about some frustrations and wishes for the craft chocolate industry. We both commented on wishing chocolate makers would use packaging that could be either resealed or at least reclosed. Bean-to-bar wrappers are beautiful, but once some of them are opened, they don't do a great job of keeping the chocolate itself fresh. Nicole also expressed a desire to see more makers create fun chocolate treats beyond bars. So many novelty shops offer chocolate in fun shapes and formats, but with really bad chocolate, and it would be great to see more craft chocolate offered this way, though we understand the expense involved in molds and other equipment and R&D. Only Child Chocolate has a lot of fun with this, and we'd love to see more makers diversify their products. Thanks to Nicole for coming on the show, and to all of you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.